students shouldn't just have to survive, they should be able to thrive. They should be able to, even at the bare minimum, be able to treat themselves to a meal out a month, or a night out every couple of weeks or something. So absolutely do that, because particularly, again, if you're moving away from home, you might not know anyone. It's really important to build that community, to feel that sense of belonging to get you through those 3 years.
This episode is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Hello and welcome to the Investing Insiders podcast, where we help you achieve financial well-being by making smarter money decisions. I'm Brianne, and in today's episode, we'll be talking about everything student money related to help make your university budgeting experience that little bit easier. Joining us today is Tom Allingham, Communications Director at Save the Student. Tom, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brianne. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, Tom. Going to university and having to deal with finances for the first time can feel super overwhelming. How important is it to have some kind of plan before you kind of make the move and get started?
I think it's probably the most important thing that you can do before starting university. I think there's always that kind of typical student stereotype of, students are bad with money, or they don't have a lot to live on. So, they live on baked beans and pot noodles and all the rest of it, but, they still get to go out and, all that stuff. Unfortunately, not to bring the mood down too much early on, unfortunately, over the past 5 or 6 years, making ends meet at university has become exponentially more difficult. We might get into it a bit more later on, but the biggest cause of that is basically the fact that the maintenance loan, so that's the loan that students get to live on at university, that was never really enough in the first place. But over the past 5 or 6 years, it has fallen well short of inflation. So in essence, the monthly shortfall that students face between their loan and their living costs, that has basically more than doubled over like a 5 or 6 year period. So to have a financial plan before starting university could not be more important now than at any other time in history, really.
And for anybody who is completely new to managing money or thinking about working through their finances by themselves, where's the best place to get started with that financial plan?
I guess kind of getting to grips with what a budget is and how a budget works. So, it's particularly if you are a prospective student as well, and you maybe don't even have a grip on, the kind of costs that you might face as a student. But also, as I say, if you are a student going to university this year, this is just as helpful to get an idea of what your outgoings will be. So you'll have, if you're moving away from home in particular, you'll have some real kind of regular outgoings like rent, bills, maybe some travel in there, groceries, all these kinds of things that you can't help but spend money on. They're unavoidable. But also then take into account the money that you have coming in. So again, in most cases, that will include your student loan. You might have some parental contributions. You might be getting a part-time job, maybe some bursaries and scholarships as well. Then essentially what you want to do is look at the difference between that. So do I have more money coming in than I'm spending? Or unfortunately, more likely, am I going to be potentially spending more money than I have coming in? Now, there are loads of budgeting tools that you can use to help you kind of figure this out. We have one on our website. We have a free budget sheet. Excuse me. But as I say, there are loads of tools out there. It is a lot easier than it sounds. I think people hear the kind of suggestion of making a budget and think that's complicated or that's boring. I can't promise it won't be boring, but it's definitely not difficult. It's easy to put in these numbers. And if you don't know how much you'll be spending, again, on our website, we have from our surveys kind of average amounts that students have been spending on different things. So you can, even if you don't know exactly what you'll be spending, you can get a rough idea.
I think that sounds like a really great place to start. It's just getting things down, whether on paper, using one of those online resources or an app, and getting an idea of how things look. Because sometimes I think it's difficult to quantify when it's all just in your head. Like you might make a mental checklist, but when you actually put things down on paper, you're like, wow, I completely forgot that I'd have to cover this.
Yeah.
With a lot of the kind of, surveys that you've done and the data that you've looked at, what are some of the common mistakes people might make when it comes to budgeting, or things that they often forget that they'll need to cover?
I think in terms of common mistakes, I wouldn't say it's hard to say whether it's a mistake or not, but I think there are certainly some things where if you, as a student, have never had to cover your own costs before. There are certainly things where I think people are shocked at how much they cost. And one of the kind of ones that we always joke about in the team, but is definitely true, and we all could remember it from when we were students, was the cost of cheese. We were all just amazed at how expensive cheese was when we started university. And I remember as well having it for meat as well. So if you are someone who eats meat, you might be surprised at, again, when you have to start paying for your own costs, just how much some of these groceries cost, again, particularly over the past 3 or 4 years, where food inflation has been higher than normal inflation as well. So I think that is something where, maybe it's not necessarily a money mistake, but it's not realizing how much these everyday items actually cost.
And I guess, thinking about things like that. So when you're putting together these shopping lists, how realistic do you need to be in terms of, okay, this is the amount that things are costing. This is, the type of meal plan that I'd like to have. How granular do you need to get when it comes to being realistic about what your shopping list is going to look like?
I would say you probably can't be too granular. I think when you are working to a tight budget, there is no harm in going super granular and working out, this is how much I'd spend on salt or whatever else. We have a meal plan on the site that gives basically, I think, 28 days of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks for, I think, roughly about the cost of a meal deal per day for all of your meals. But within that, we do take into account literally this is the cost of this meal. That includes this amount of olive oil, which breaks down to this cost. So like 3p or something like that. And again, when you are working to a very tight budget, I think you kind of have to go to that granular level. It can be a little bit tedious at points, but if it means that you're actually able to make ends meet at university and continue to the end of your degree, then it's absolutely worth it.
Totally agree. I think it's one of those things where it's difficult when you've never had to think about it before. But like you were mentioning before, just really thinking about it, getting those costs down and having a clear picture of what you're likely to spend, it can really, really help put you in a good position. When looking at sort of average costs, is there a general rough outline of roughly how much you should be looking at your expenses coming to over the cost of your sort of terms and things like that?
So it's kind of tricky. So in our survey that we run every year, the National Student Money Survey, we do have a figure of what students tell us they spend each month on their living costs. However, before I give you that number, what I would caveat it with is that students are struggling, and students are, for example, telling us that they are, skipping meals. I think 2/3 of students tell us that they skip meals at least some of the time in order to save money. Students are turning to food banks, all of these kinds of things. So what students are spending is not necessarily what it costs to live. So in our survey, students told us that they spend an average of £1,142 a month on their living costs. But as I say, that is what it looks like when you are not living what most people would describe as a kind of full and healthy lifestyle. And there is actually separate research from HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute. They put the amount of money that you would need to actually kind of live a decent standard of life as a student at roughly £20,000 a year. So if you take our monthly total and put that into a kind of annual amount, you're looking at about 11 or 12 grand. HEPI say that you need about 20 grand to live. So
that's a massive shortfall.
It's a big shortfall, exactly. And even with our figure of what students are spending, so that, as I say, £1,142 a month figure, the maintenance loan falls short of that by £502 a month. So even just to get to that standard of living, there's a big shortfall that you need to make up. If you then want to get above that to a healthy, happy standard, there's more money required on top of that, unfortunately. And the other thing I should say as well is that figure I've just given you is a nationwide average. So across the UK, that will vary drastically. It's much higher in London. It's about £100, £200 higher in London each month. But then I think Northern Ireland is the cheapest region. It's almost £200 a month cheaper in Northern Ireland.
That is quite a huge figure. And that is something that I think weighs on a lot of students and prospective students. The idea that, the amount that you might get through student finance won't necessarily cover your essential costs, not even going into, anything extravagant or any additional things that might help with your, studying journey. I guess for those people that, have that shortfall and are a bit anxious about what it might take to bridge that gap, what are some of the options that they can consider to make sure that they've got enough for their essentials and potentially a bit extra during their university life?
Yes. So I'd say the first most important thing that anyone can do is to, and if, obviously not all students will have this kind of experience, but if you do live with your parents and your parents are able to make some kind of financial contribution to you, then have that conversation with them as early as possible. If you don't get the maximum maintenance loan, it's because the government is expecting your parents, based on their household income, to make some kind of financial contribution to you to bridge that gap. As I say, even if you do get the maximum amount, you're probably still not going to have enough to cover your living costs. But that being said, have as open and as honest as a discussion with your parents as early as possible to, basically lay out to them the fact that, look, I'm not going to get enough money from the government. Even if I got the maximum amount, it wouldn't be enough. Is there anything you can do to help me? And on the parent side, just be mindful that it's not a case of your child being the stereotypical student, who can't manage their money well. Unfortunately, even if they were the best person in the world at managing their money, the fact of the matter is they don't have enough coming in to cover their costs. So that's the number one thing. Have that discussion as early as possible. The next thing would be to spend 2-3 hours, however long it takes, looking for bursaries, grants, and scholarships. Because there are so many funds out there. And it's not just the normal funds for people who, have the highest grades or come from the lowest income backgrounds, or study a particular subject or whatever. Those funds obviously do exist, but they're very well known about. The other ones that are lesser known about are potentially ones that are worth really digging for. Because again, it could be free money. So one of the examples I always give is the Vegetarian Society, which gives £500 to students who are vegetarian or vegan and who are struggling financially. Again, £500 straight in your pocket, doesn't have to be repaid. There's another fund from, this is a bit more specific, but it's the University of Roehampton. They give, I think, £2,000 as a scholarship to students who are kind of excel in esports. So obviously playing FIFA or Fortnite or Call of Duty to a kind of, professional-ish level. Again, £2,000 that doesn't have to be repaid. Now, I appreciate those are two quite niche examples, but it underlines the fact that there are so many reasons why you could be eligible for extra funding. So again, it's absolutely worth spending an hour or two looking for that extra funding, because if you come out of that with, £1,000, £2,000, £3,000, however much, what I always like to say is it's probably going to be the best paid hour or two of your entire life. So it's absolutely worth it.
Definitely. I think really kind of having a look at all of the options available and not necessarily assuming that something might not be open to you. What do you think about making an application if, for example, without assuming that you won't get it, is it always worth just making an application to see if you might qualify for something through your university or through, one of those more niche societies or things like that, just to see if something comes through?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, unless obviously there's a line. So if it's going to take you 4 hours to write an application for something that you're pretty sure you're not going to get, then maybe it's not worth your time. But if it might only take you 20, 30 minutes, and you think there is some chance if you get it, then absolutely. I spoke to somebody yesterday for a different piece, and she was telling me that her sister received £1,000 from her university, and it was a big university as well. Received £1,000 as a bursary, but found out that she was the only person that had applied for it.
Oh, wow.
But there was more than one fund available. So there was just all this extra money sitting on the table because students literally hadn't applied for it. So again, I think that underlines the fact that it's worth a go.
This episode of the Investing Insiders podcast is sponsored by Saxo Markets. Saxo provides access to a broad range of global assets through a sophisticated trading platform. You can trade US stocks from as little as $1 per trade and UK stocks from $3 per trade. Please remember that all investing involves risk. The value of your investments can go down as well as up, and you could get back less than you invest. Terms and conditions apply. Visit Saxo Markets to learn more. Looking at budgeting and thinking about the university experience as a whole, your essentials and studying are a core part of it. When it comes to things like, social activities, building your community, and doing different things maybe in the city that you live in or town that you live in to enrich your experience whilst there, those things also sometimes come at an extra cost. What is the importance of kind of making room for those things in your experience? And what are some of the ways that you can balance your budget to try and make sure that you can cover your essentials, but also leave a bit of room to enjoy and have fun along the way as well?
So I'd say it's absolutely worth making the time and potentially worth putting the money aside for it as well. But it's absolutely worth making the time for it because, again, something I always say, and this is one of the reasons why we really strongly advocate for better student funding, is that students shouldn't just have to survive. They should be able to thrive. They should be able to, you know, even at the bare minimum, be able to treat themselves to a meal out a month, or a night out every couple of weeks or something. Like that shouldn't be something that's considered a, overwhelming luxury that students should have to avoid. So absolutely do that because particularly again, if you're moving away from home, you might not know anyone. It's really important to build that community to feel that sense of belonging to get you through those 3 years. The reason I kind of added the caveat of you might not necessarily have to put money aside for it. I mean, if you can, absolutely great. But lots of universities and SUs run free events and accommodations, student accommodation do this as well. So it might be that they run, a free movie night or a free drink session or a free kind of free dinner or something like that. So yes, there will be lots of, things you can do in the area that cost money. And again, there are always ways to save money on that. We have loads of ways on the website to save money on, going to the cinema, going to restaurants, all this kind of stuff. But if money is at a premium and you are looking to kind of meet people at your university or in the area, then definitely look out for those free events at university because there are so many of them and they are one of the best ways to meet people.
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on a really important point there, looking for those kind of deals, discounts, freebies, and things like that that can just help either balance the budget or help you save money along the way. Thinking about some of those essential costs that you could potentially apply those tips to, thinking about a food shop potentially, how to cut the cost of transport, maybe even household bills. What are some of the key takeaway points that can help people cut, their expenses in those areas?
So I'll start with household bills actually, because I think one thing that not everybody knows, and certainly I didn't know when I went to university, is that if you're a full-time student, you do not pay council tax. And that's particularly, if you're in a house that's entirely kind of lived in by full-time students, then the house as a whole just doesn't pay council tax. It gets a little bit more complicated, but not actually that complicated at all. If, say, you're a full-time student, but you're living with, people who aren't students at all, or maybe part-time students, you as an individual still don't pay council tax. So the rest of the house does and will get a slight discount. But you as an individual do not pay council tax. That's one really important thing to know. In terms of kind of food and groceries, I mean, I would always advise using supermarket cashback apps if you possibly can. So there are a few out there. There's Shopmium, there's Green Gin, and one or two others where you can basically get, the selection of products on there will change every few weeks, but you can get money off or sometimes completely free products at your local supermarket. Again, all of the big ones are on there. But also the classic one is the reduced section. So work out what time of day your supermarket tends to stock up its reduced section. Then get in there when they do that, see what you can get and put in your freezer. I mean, I've not been in university now for 11 years, but I still do this every single day. I always, on my lunch break, walk around all the shops near me, check out the reduced section. It's pretty much how I buy all of my meat and then just chuck it in the freezer. And then in terms of transport, I mean, there are a couple of ways you can save money. It's obviously one of the most expensive things. Getting a rail card is the big one. So that would save you a third on off-peak rail journeys. But the real trick is if you live in London, you can link your rail card to your Oyster card. And then that will save you money when you're traveling on the tube, on the overground, on the DLR, all of those things as well.
And I feel like all of those tips can make such a big difference. I mean, if you can cut the cost of your food by simply timing your shop, as you mentioned,
Exactly.
It can save so much money. And yeah, where you can cut the cost of travel as well. It's one of those things that, we all have to do it, but it just seems to keep going up every year. So trying to kind of keep on top of that is such a big one as well. I guess, once you kind of get a bit more agency over your budget. It's great putting into place all of these things, money saving tips, trying to keep on top of your spending and things like that. Sometimes the temptation to overspend might come in. So, for example, if you're out with friends and it might not necessarily be in the budget, but you spend on something extra, or you might see something on social media, say, and you're like, okay, that looks really cool. Maybe I'll just get this. In a world that's kind of always encouraging us to spend, how can you kind of help yourself not fall into the habit of, let me just get this, and that kind of snowballing into, oh my gosh, there's now like an even bigger shortfall in my budget?
Yeah. And I think actually as well, you talk about there being a kind of world that encourages us to overspend. I think another thing is the fact that because we're predominantly just using card payments now and not cash, again, it feels like fake money, or you don't keep a track of it in the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But with that in mind, there is one trick that we absolutely love, which again, I use now. I'm not a student, but I still use it now, is to have two bank accounts, or at least two bank accounts. So you'll have your student bank account, which is, the one that you'll get your student loan paid into. Maybe you'll get your parental contributions into there, your wages, whatever else. And it should be where you kind of pay your big expenses from. So rent, bills, all the rest of it. But you also want a second bank account, and you'll use that for your day-to-day spending. So depending on how often you budget, maybe weekly or monthly, you'll move a set amount of money over from your main bank account over to your second bank account. So let's say, for argument's sake, you move £100 over there each week. That way, you only have £100 on there. And it's a small thing, but you'll find you're way more likely to stick to a budget because I only have £100 on this card to spend this week. So I need to be careful about what I'm spending that money on. And yes, at some points you may need to add a bit more money to it, but at least you've done it. At least okay, I've had to put an extra £20 on the card this week. Therefore, I need to be a little bit more careful with my money going forward, rather than, as you've kind of said, having all your money on one card, seeing a few things here and there that you fancy buying, and not really keeping a track of it, and not knowing in your head, okay, I've actually spent 200 quid more than I should have done. By having it on two cards and tracking that amount of money each week, again, so much easier to keep track of things.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic idea and an absolute game changer when it comes to budgeting, because you've got your pot that's kind of, the source of your income, and then you've got the one that you're actually spending from, and it just helps get those figures into your head. And also, I think maybe takes the pressure out of tracking everything, because you've got one that lets you see your spending and one which you kind of transfer money from. So hopefully that kind of helps listeners, especially when it comes to, budgeting for the first time, really just simplify the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I could see you nodding as well. I sense it's maybe something that you do yourself as well.
I've got, oh gosh, how many? I think I've got about 3 bank accounts.
There you go.
So it really does just help, honestly. I think, back when I was a student, it was kind of just having all of the money in one account. And I think at the time, you kind of just go with the flow with things. You're just like, yeah, no, it's fine. But then when you finally kind of check your statement, it can be, a little bit disheartening sometimes, because you're like, oh, actually, I'm going to have to move something from here to here. And it just gets very complicated. So being able to simplify it in that way, it helps tremendously.
Yeah, I think as well, because of the fact that, when you are a student, unless you're from Scotland, you get your student loan paid in 3 chunks throughout the year, which means that, again, particularly when you have started university for the first time, September, you get a payment of like 2 or 3 grand landing in your bank account, which feels like a hell of a lot of money. But when, and you maybe go out and spend loads of money during freshers, but actually that money is meant to last you until January, and it's meant to cover your rent, your bills, your groceries. So actually that 2 or 3 grand quickly gets down to very, very little very quickly.
Definitely. And I think also with the rise of banks like Monzo and Starling, and now high street banks starting to do it as well, I think setting up those spending alerts or, budgeting notifications that let you know how much is going out maybe every month or something, it just helps trigger something in your head that's like, okay, let me just double check things, or it helps you kind of keep track of things as well. So really utilizing all of the features of your banking apps and things like that, I think can really help too.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the things that can come up, especially, once you're going into your, university years, you're a fully fledged adult now and you're managing your finances, is the idea of credit. So you might potentially get your first credit card at this point, or you might be able to use schemes like buy now, pay later. Is that something that's worth exploring during this part of life when income can tend to be a little bit more strained? Or, if you're solely relying on student finance, there's obviously a limited amount that's coming in. What are the thoughts around thinking about credit or how it could possibly be used during this point in time?
Our general advice would be, in most circumstances, don't use it. So I will take credit cards and buy now, pay later as two separate things. Credit cards, I think, can be good. In general life can be good. So as an adult, it's obviously a great way to help build your credit score. It comes with, kind of different consumer protections. If you can get a 0% credit card, that's a really great way of spreading the cost of bigger purchases over time. As a student, you're very unlikely to be able to get a 0% credit card. And the other thing I should say, obviously, is that credit cards are only good, really, if you can pay it off when it's not 0%, if you can pay it off in full at the end of every single month. So with all of that in mind, as a student, you're very unlikely to get a 0% credit card unless you are absolutely 100% sure that you can pay it off in full at the end of every single month. Because if you don't, you'll get charged interest. Unless you're sure you can do that, do not get a credit card. As I say, as a student, because you have a low income and probably quite a relatively poor credit score because you've not had time to build any kind of credit history. With all of that in mind, you're probably not going to get a good deal on a credit card. One or two banks, I think, still do offer student credit cards, but they're few and far between. There used to be more. Really, I wouldn't go for it at all. If you're looking for emergency cash in particular, you're looking for ways to kind of get a bit more money, do not go for a credit card. Look at the 0% overdraft that comes on a student bank account. So as I say, credit cards can be good in some limited circumstances, particularly as a student, even more limited. Buy now, pay later, I would avoid at all ages. It's interesting. We run a few surveys. One of them is our banking survey. And one of the questions we ask in it is, do you use buy now, pay later? And what do you think about it? Now, the percentage of people using it has been, I think, off the top of my head, broadly similar for the few years that we've asked this question. But the kind of additional information students give us about what they think about it has over time become more negative. For me, that's encouraging because I think when all of these schemes first started launching, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I think they were overwhelmingly viewed as this positive thing. I can buy this thing on ASOS. I don't have to pay for it straight away. And if I don't like it, I can send it back. Over time, I think, partly because of the kind of work that we do, but many other organizations as well, people have become more wary of the risks of them. So not just the fact that it can damage your credit score, but also the fact that it really encourages a mindset of overspending. And I think for me, what's really concerning is, it's one thing seeing it on clothing websites. It's another thing altogether seeing it on takeaway websites. So there are some, I won't necessarily name any brand specifically, but there are some very high profile takeaway websites where you can split the cost of a takeaway using buy now, pay later services. I find that really concerning. If you can't afford to pay for a takeaway up front, broadly speaking, you shouldn't be getting that takeaway and you shouldn't be encouraged into getting it under this illusion that, okay, you can split the cost in that way. So I would say, yeah, student or not, avoid buy now, pay later schemes if you possibly can.
Absolutely. It can potentially be that kind of snowball effect of, thinking that it's covering the cost of something. However, if the funds weren't there in the beginning, they're probably unlikely to come later down the line. So,
exactly.
And it's really, really, as we've kind of mentioned before, getting quite honest with yourself about what are the essentials, what do you actually need, and then finding a way to cover that kind of lies outside of, borrowing in that way, which can really snowball and people can get into quite a lot of difficulty later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of other costs that can come up during the university years are things like insurance and, finding ways to kind of protect your belongings whilst you're away from home. How important is it to kind of take out, say, a contents insurance policy or a gadgets insurance policy to protect your things whilst you're living away?
So it is and it isn't. it is absolutely important to protect your belongings. So in our accommodation survey, for instance, 5% of students told us that they had been victim of a break-in or a burglary. And it's quite a common thing with student houses where either because the house is in a bit of a poorer state, so maybe it's easier to break into, or maybe, being frank, students being a little bit more lax about things. Maybe they've come home drunk. Maybe it's their first time living away from home and they haven't quite got a grasp of home security. Burglars might target houses in student areas. So in that respect, definitely. But then there are also other things. So again, students telling us about the issues they have with their houses, damp, electrical faults, flooding, leaks, all of these kinds of things. Because unfortunately, lots of student houses aren't in the greatest of conditions, there is a chance that, some of your possessions might get damaged. And depending on the policy, you may be able to have that covered. So in that respect, yes, it's absolutely worth getting cover. The reason I have the caveat is that actually lots of students might find that they're covered under their parents' policy. So lots of contents insurance policies say that basically, if you are a student, as long as you return home at some level of frequency, so I think often it's like if you come home once every 90 days, although obviously do check your own policy. But let's say is that. So if you come home at least once every 90 days, then your possessions will be covered in your student accommodation. Now, again, there will be more terms attached to it. So it might be that you'd only be covered in student halls. It might be that only certain types of possessions are covered. But in a lot of cases, that will apply. It will be that you don't need to get your own contents insurance policy because you will already be covered. If you're not, then you will have to get your own. But again, there are lots of student discounts or like student specific schemes that are available. So don't just kind of go out there and look for, general contents insurance. Do see if there is a student specific scheme that you can get.
That's really, really great in terms of breaking that down. I think sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming when, if you go to, say, a freshers fair or something like that, or on your first day, and, people are asking you about, okay, do you have insurance? And a lot of the time it's like, I actually don't know. I've never really thought about it before. So just having that kind of breakdown and really thinking about, do you A, need cover? B, are you potentially already covered under your parent or guardian's existing policy? That can kind of really help you there. In terms of just, one piece of financial advice that you kind of wish every prospective student knew, and even students that might be going into, their next year of studying, what's one piece of financial advice that you kind of wish everyone knew to, take away and help them on their financial journey?
I think it would be, and I kind of already touched on it earlier, but it would be to get the best, or even maybe more accurately, get the right student bank account for them. So this is obviously the time of year when all the banks come out with their student bank account offers. And often what grabs the headline is the freebie that they're offering. So it could be that they're offering a shopping voucher. It could be that they're offering cash. They might be offering a rail card, something like that. And those are great. Like, obviously you're not going to turn your nose up at them. But the far more important thing, for all of the reasons that we've already discussed, the far more important thing is the interest-free overdraft that comes with it. So very, very briefly, in case people don't know, all student bank accounts come with a 0% overdraft where you don't pay interest on what you've borrowed. And once you graduate, you get at least 1 year on the same 0% terms. Sometimes it's up to 3 years on the same 0% terms. Again, so to give you that buffer to start earning money, to start getting out of your overdraft before you have to start repaying it. Now, because it's so difficult to make ends meet as a student, there's a good chance you'll end up in your overdraft at some point. And unfortunately, in some cases, you might end up quite far into that overdraft. So the difference between having, I think the maximum overdraft available this year, I think is £3,250. At the lower end of things, some banks are only offering 1,500. Now that is a huge difference. That's over double at the top end. So if you are unfortunately in a situation where a few rainy days have hit, or you live in an expensive area or whatever, and you are having to dip further into that overdraft, and as I say, this isn't recommending that you rely on your overdraft. It's just the reality of living as a student. If you find yourself facing some difficult financial kind of periods, then having that bigger 0% overdraft could quite literally be the difference between you being able to stay at university or not. And at the very least will mean that you don't have to turn to other more expensive forms of borrowing, like credit cards, like private loans, like these other forms of cash that will cost you money. The 0% overdraft will not cost you a penny until at least a year after you graduated.
Amazing. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your tips today. I think they've given such great insight into all of the different budgeting hacks that can be used to help make your finances a little bit easier if you're at university.
No worries. Thank you, Brianne.
Thank you so much for joining our Investing Insiders podcast. If you like the episode, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on your platform of choice. For the latest money news and deals, you can sign up to our weekly newsletter at investinginsiders.co.uk/newsletter-page. We've also got a suite of guides, tools, and calculators on our website at investinginsiders.co.uk. You can also keep up to date with us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next episode.